Okay, good morning, everybody. This is Dave Walker with the B to SMB Institute. Happy to see you on this kickoff to our Forward 21 conference. We brought these a lot of these sessions together really around the need that all of us had when we begin the year to have data and insights that are going to help us build fact-based strategies and fact-based tactics and plans. And so we thought no better place to kick off as we look at our customer base, the small business base across the US, with Eric Groves of Alignable. Eric, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Dave. Great to be here. I'm doing okay.
Awesome. Well, listen, it's good to have you, and we've had you several times, since the pandemic began, and really years before that, and you always bring an enormous amount of insight based on the survey of small businesses that you guys have been running on a month-to-month basis, critically since the pandemic began. I think the first one that you did was back in March, right?
Yeah, early mid-March, I think, March 12th
Yeah.
or so. Yeah.
So what I asked of you is, okay, you've had 10 months of examining kind of where small businesses are at, and what's the picture that's kind of formed in your head of where are they right now? And so I want to give you the opportunity to kind of explain it the way you want to explain it. But I guess my first question for you is, has the level of crisis amongst small businesses, has it changed dramatically over the course of the last 10 months?
Well, it's a great question and a great segue into sort of the first data slide where we're really talking about information gathered early on a weekly basis and more recently on a monthly basis, where we've been tracking the overall impact of COVID on small business owners. And what this chart shows is from left to right, sort of starting in March and ending through the end of this past year, the impact recorded in almost 600,000 responses during that time. And so what we did is we consistently asked small businesses, what is the impact that COVID is having on your business? And you can see, at the outset in early mid-March, this significant jump up to almost 90% of small businesses being significantly impacted by COVID. And what we would hope, or what we had thought at the time, was that we would see this sort of rise from 90%, maybe a little bit higher, and then a nice slow decline over time, so that by the end of this year, the greater part of this chart would be green and blue. So the green being not impacting, and the blue being that they're feeling that the impact is over. And what we actually saw was, while there was this burst through March through early May, and we started to see a decline in May, what we've seen since then is basically a stabilized impact where 50% of small businesses across the board were feeling significant financial impact from COVID. And rather than decline over time, it's really sustained itself. And that's been the burden on small businesses, which has been a burden of, lack of revenue, lack of cash flow, expenses continuing on, employees that they had to figure out who they had to keep on and who they could let go, and how they could run their businesses, but always looking for this sort of light at the end of the tunnel that could say, okay, we can predictably feel like in the next couple of months or the next quarter that we will be through this. We will, the storm will have passed. And I think, the analogy that many of us had was, how does this compare to a typical natural disaster, right? A tornado, an earthquake, a fire. And it turns out that FEMA over many, many years has built this sort of great framework for understanding what happens to a community that's hit by a massive natural disaster, whether that's a hurricane or an earthquake or a tornado. And interestingly, in April when this hit, I had actually been working with this framework, really trying to understand how we as a community, an online community, could help communities recover from one of these natural disasters. And so I've been looking at the pieces of this, understanding there was a preparedness phase where you kind of pull all the resources together and have them deployed around the country so that you can easily draw on them.
Mm-hmm.
There was this disaster phase, which was really the impact. That's the hurricane hitting Houston or wherever. And the interesting thing about a lot of these natural disasters is they're fairly time bound, right? You know, you can see on the radar the eye of the hurricane coming and then the storm passing, and you know, the devastation is done.
Mm-hmm.
But in many ways, right after that, the skies turn blue and recovery can begin. You know, and at that point in time, there's sort of this short-term period of time that FEMA calls for their natural disaster response, and that's the assembly of forces to come in and really rebuild your infrastructure. So the roads, the electrical, the water, all of the things that are needed to actually help the community recover, temporary housing and all of that. And it goes through this sort of short-term period of kind of getting the electricity back on and all of that stuff, where, you know, once that's done, then a community can start to recover. And that sort of happens in this intermediate phase, where consumers who are displaced start to migrate back, businesses can start to open up. And the success of any given community in recovering is really driven by how the community comes together, establishes a new normal for the community, and moves forward towards a period of recovery, which can happen over months and years. And so it's really a great framework to kind of then say, okay, so how is a pandemic going to be the same and how's it going to be different? So, you know, in early April, I kind of took this FEMA recovery framework and kind of guesstimated, based on what I was hearing, what it might look like for the coronavirus recovery. And, you know, right out of the gate, we knew a couple of things. One, we were poorly prepared. So ultimately, when this is over, we need to go back and figure that out and make sure that we're more prepared in the future. But that there was going to be this period of coronavirus outbreak. And in fact, what happened was it took the disaster from a short-term impact and kind of flipped it over on its side and let it run. And what we saw on the previous slide was really what that disaster looked like. And it was months long. It still is months long, and it's still continuing to this day. And in terms of getting the community back together and enabling it to recover, what we're looking at and seeing now is that there's really not a hope of doing that until the vaccine is widely distributed and we can kind of take this case growth level and turn it in the opposite direction. And once that happens, then we can start the recovery. The great news relative to a natural disaster is our infrastructure is still relatively intact, right? Our bridges, our electrical, our cable, thank goodness, is all working. So recovery, in a sense, won't require a lot of infrastructure rebuild, but what it will require is a massive shift in consumer behavior, right? Because what was happened over this prolonged disaster is our behavior as consumers has shifted away from local businesses, whether due to the fact that they were closed or they couldn't get inventory or we just didn't feel safe going, and shifted it all online to places, you know, like Amazon that conveniently deliver it to our front step. The challenge there is we have basically sucked all of this money out of our local economies and sent it off to places like, you know, Arkansas and Seattle, where large corporations who are distributing goods are located. And really, for us to recover, what's going to happen after the vaccine is widely distributed and we get the case counts down is that we're going to need a massive shift in consumer behavior. And we're going to need to rally local communities to bring them together so that they can do this in conjunction with all of the other people in that community. And so it represents a huge opportunity for businesses and brands in the small business space to really play a role in that recovery and helping these small businesses and the small business economy sort of jumpstart itself and come back to life. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out was, you know, everybody sort of talks about PPP and the importance of it. And it's a massively important element and a piece of the recovery. in a sense, it's a piece of broken infrastructure that's being bridged, right? When you
Mhm.
look at this, and this data was from December, 85% of small businesses were saying at some point, somewhat important, all the way up to critically important, that they need relief funds to get through this time. So think of it as a small business owner. You're looking out and you're saying, okay, COVID is going to keep going. We need the vaccine. They're talking about May, June timeframe. I need to get to that point in time.
Right.
And to get to that point in time, I need financial resources. So while we think about PPP as, oh, this is an injection in cash to kind of help them recovery, it's not. It's just a bridge. It's a bridge to the other side where their recovery can actually start in earnest. Um, and when we asked them, would you apply if the PPP were approved? Here we got 65% saying absolutely. So one of the things is going to be, how long is that money that they've allocated actually going to last? But then when we asked business owners, so what's more important in terms of recovery, PPP or access to this money, or if you could wave a magic wand and you could get PPP to your business by the end of February, or you could get the vaccine deployed by the end of February across the vast majority of the country, which would you pick? And it was like almost a 60-40 split, where they were
Mhm.
saying they would rather have the vaccine deployed because they know that that's what's required in order to recover,
Mhm.
whereas the PPP is really just a bridge across this chasm that is the COVID crisis. Um, and so, we
Can you
saw
back
that.
up? Can it?
Yeah,
Sorry to interrupt, but back up a second because I kind of want to break down each of these things because I think that there's a lot obviously
yeah,
in these
happy to.
slides. The in first of all, do the small businesses create a differentiation between quote this round of funding, where they're really looking for cash that they can use any way they need or choose to use for their
Mhm.
business versus the first round, which was very, very much pointed at keep people employed. Is there any within these numbers? They say they need new relief funds. Do they need new relief funds to cover the cost of employees, or do they really need it just so they can pay rent or they can, support their own pivot, their own new infrastructure? And certainly to a certain extent employees as well, but how are they
Yeah.
looking at how do they describe the funds that they actually need?
So it's a great question. And we asked them what would the uses be of the money that they would get. And
Hmm.
now, first of all, with our base and small business across the board, 81% of them are solos, right? Independent
Hmm.
contractors. So not surprisingly, when we asked them what they would do with the money, the number one thing was paying bills, paying suppliers, paying rent, basically being able to keep their business from being in default with others was the number one place that they were going to spend it. Number two was being able to pay their employees if they had employees. So literally being able to keep people on payroll. And then number three was, other expenses.
Hmm.
A lot of the press that gets thrown out there about PP is, for the people, the unscrupulous people who took the money and didn't need the money.
Hmm.
In this case, I really think that they've learned a lot, and the PPP funds are really, well, they tried to set it up so it was going to businesses that were hardest hit. They have a special carve out for shuttered businesses like movie theaters and folks that literally couldn't, bring anybody in the door. They gave restaurants 3.5 times employee salary level rather than 2.5 times. They gave them a little bit more flexibility on how they could spend the money.
Hmm.
But in reality, small business owners would rather not take somebody else's money if they didn't need to, right? They would much rather not incur debt of any kind, even if it's going to be forgiven, because they want to stand on their own 2 feet, and they're, for the most part, they're not huge fans of government spending or waste, and so they wouldn't ask for this money if they didn't desperately need it. And after almost 9 months of, in many cases, these businesses having less than 25% of the revenues that they had pre-COVID. You
Hmm.
can imagine how it's just, tearing them apart.
And did you get a sense, as you were kind of pulsing in your survey, the percentage that were actually closing, as well as the percentage that were in to use words, I mean, they were hanging on by their fingernails. They were able to generate just enough revenue to just squeak by, and they've managed to just squeak by through the end of the year. How do you think the small business segments, when it comes to survival and survivability, how do they break out now, do you think?
Well, it's so hard to tell, because small business owners don't have a fallback job, right? Well,
Right.
maybe they have their side hustles that they're doing to try and meet their bills. But it's not like they go back to corporate America. They want to keep their businesses alive and kicking. And many of them have changed the way that they've done business in order to try and bring some revenue into the business. We saw during the summer months where restaurants could open up, turn parking lots into outdoor seating. Well, it gets a little bit harder when it's 30 degrees, or like you guys are about to get hit by a snowstorm. And so they've done a lot, and they've been incredibly creative, and they will continue to be creative. But at the core of this is just, at the end of the day, they've lost their revenue stream. They
Hmm.
still have expenses. Consumers have shifted behavior away from a lot of these folks, and they're struggling. And
Hmm.
if, like I said, if they could wave a magic wand, they would get the vaccine into everybody's arm this week. But we've seen, even with that, I'm in Massachusetts, and the distribution strategy is a complete mess. And I think in reality, it's kind of mind-blowing that these guys had months and months and months to prepare for distributing this vaccine, and it's almost like they didn't even think about it until it was approved. Um,
Yeah, I'm disappointed to say that the same is true here in Illinois. And I think where you are in Massachusetts, New York, Illinois, we were all the ones who kind of took the massive load of cases in the early
mhm.
days, disproportionately to the rest of the country, and learned some very hard lessons there. And I'm equally disappointed that, geez, guys, we're part of the set that really almost had a full year to think about this,
Yes.
and we're still kind of very randomized in how we are distributing the vaccine. But setting aside that that wonderful conversation,
Yep.
um, take us a little bit further into this of some of the other observations that you think have really kind of come about through the year.
Well, it was interesting to see, because our latest survey was after PPP was announced that round three was approved.
Hmm.
And so when we looked at the data, this is a question we've been asking for many months now, in terms of, what are your greatest concerns in
Hmm.
terms of the recovery and your business being able to survive? And, we've kind of tracked it, and it's kind of an eye chart, but a couple of things to point out. The top three concerns have always been the federal government or state government reclosing my business.
Hmm.
So I don't have control over that. My financial reserves running out,
Hmm.
and customer behavior. So customers being too afraid to return to my business.
Hmm.
Now, what we saw in December with the approval of the PPP funds was an interesting shift, where all of a sudden financial reserves running out went down a little bit. So the
Hmm.
concern was reduced there. But on the flip side, customers being afraid to return going way up.
Hmm.
And so that kind of speaks to the fact that, this consumer behavior shift is now that they're thinking, oh, okay, I may have enough money to get across the chasm. It's all about how am I going to be able to recover? And for a lot of these businesses, that means, it's not me opening the door, it's people walking through the door as a customer, that's going to allow a lot of these local economies to restart. And that was what really got us thinking about, well, how is the vaccine going to be deployed? How quickly will it happen? and it's kind of terrifying to think about even these new strains that are coming out, because I hope the vaccine is helpful in dealing with those as well. But at the end of the day, what we need is, we've got this funding. We need to make sure it gets to the right businesses who direly need this money. And then we need to start working on how we shift consumer behavior. And, not to pick on Amazon, because they do a phenomenal job at what they do, but, a quick, analysis of $100 being spent, where does that money go? So as a consumer, if you spend that at Amazon, basically if the driver of the UPS truck or the Amazon truck happens to live in your community, then maybe about $1 of that $100 might flow back to your local community.
Hmm.
If you compare and contrast that, and this is from Amoeba, the industry organization that focuses on local businesses, their analysis points out that somewhere between 40 and 60, I put 50 in this slide,
Hmm.
dollars, or 50% of it actually stays within the community and cycles, right? It
Hmm.
cycles in the form of jobs that are created for local people, for taxes that are paid, for supplies that are bought locally, and the like. And so literally what we've done in COVID is we've drained the flows of money that were going into the local community, and we've shifted it over
Right.
to businesses that are outside of our community. And for us to recover, first we need this, the reduction in these case counts to allow people to freely get out there. But then we need to pull that knob back as far as we can to reestablish a new balance. And that's going to take the support of the masses, right? We're going to
Hmm.
have to get the word out, not only within community-led movements, but national movements around shifting our behavior back, because it's become too easy to go online. And I do it too. I order from Amazon. I try to go out and buy from local businesses as much as possible and shift my own behavior. But there's certain things that are just a lot more convenient, and we're never going to kind of flip it all the way away from Amazon. But I think getting back to where we were before is a huge goal for all of us. And I think here is the great opportunity for brands in the small business place to play a role, whether it's just getting the word out to their employees and saying, hey, we need to re-energize the local community, or thinking about ways that their platforms, their technology, their communities can echo that or support it through interesting new technologies that shift consumer behavior back to have experiences at these local restaurants and retailers and businesses. Because it really is an ecosystem. Think about, well, the real estate agents are doing great, and contractors are doing great, and accountants are doing okay, but at the top of that is retail, because a lot of those businesses provide get products and services from people who are accountants or marketers who are local. And if that top of the funnel of these consumer fed businesses isn't able to recover, the rest of the system will starve too. And so that's just the awareness thing that we really need to focus on in 2021, and bringing community together. And that's what we hope to do at Alignable, is really bring these communities together and provide brands with a place that they can go to really help.
So and that's terrific. I was going to interject that I saw some research just last week, and I'll forward it to you, from the National Restaurant Association, that showed that outside of retail, the largest majority of locally spent dollars was at restaurants. So here's restaurants really caught in the vice of COVID, of not really being able to fully open, not really being able to pivot so that they replace lost revenue, many times struggling to get PPP because they really don't have necessarily full-time employees
Right.
that they are protecting. That's not the composition of usually of the staff of a restaurant. So I think that shift of local dollars away hopefully will be in some ways reinvigorated by just simply restaurants being able to reopen and local retail being able to reopen. But you're certainly right. It's gonna create kind of a need or a demand for re-education, reacclimation, and reconnection of consumers to their local sources. So
Yeah,
let me
I'm really
ask you
hopeful that
this:
the
if
younger
you're,
generation will latch onto that, because in
yeah,
many ways they
no,
can use
I think
social
you're
media to
right.
drive it.
One would hope. So if put yourself in the shoes of, members of our audience who are really charged with the making of plans that are either marketing plans or sales plans or even product development plans directed at small businesses. As you look back on the landscape, as you look at really what small businesses are most concerned about, where they see really the areas where they're going to need, what are the top 3 or 4 things that you would recommend to a B2 SMB brand? Here, think about this as you're really going into your 2021 planning.
Well, I think you have to almost break it into two time periods. One is between now and when this new normal can start to happen, of, vaccines being out there. And during that period of time, there's, just an enormous cash challenge for small businesses. So
Hmm.
if you can find ways to provide your services and minimize the cash drain on small business owners, yet keep supporting them, I believe that it will increase your brand awareness and just sort of the trust that you have, saying, we really understand what you're going through and we want to help you in any ways that we can. And then there will be the period of recovery. At some point in time, we'll get this thing controlled, and small businesses will start to come back to life. And there, it's what can we do on the marketing side? How can companies like Google and Facebook and others with massive reach help champion the cause of shifting consumer behavior back to supporting your local community? And here I am in on Falmouth and in Cape Cod. We have these beautiful bike paths and great parks and great beaches, and a lot of that is supported by tax dollars. And if you love those things that you're surrounded by, and you have your first responders that need to be supported, then you realize the importance of actually rebuilding your own local economy. And I think whatever businesses, brands can do in support of that will be rewarded, because small businesses have,
Mhm.
a great memory. If you help them, they certainly will be loyal as heck to you. And, it's really just stopping and thinking a little bit about, well, how can we, once this shift happens, how can we really be there to bolster through our actions and our products and services, a path to recovery.
When you kind of unpack, particularly the kind of the top 3 areas of concern that small businesses have, is that really the a starting point for the consideration that you think B2SMB brands should have? In other words, should should the MarTech players all be thinking about really mission critical for small businesses is getting their customers
Yes.
back into stores? So if you're in the MarTech slice of B2SMB, that's what you should really be focused on. If you're in the tech side, um, I'm not sure what they should be thinking about. I guess what I'm trying to get at, Eric, is I think that it's easy to be a little, burned by everything that's happened over the course of 2020, into believing that there were certain sectors in the B2 SMB offering that drew great benefit, e-commerce and e-commerce related being one of them. There were sectors that were particularly hard hit, like tech hardware, or services that were directed more at small business, the small business B2B consumption kind of stuff. Where in those top 3 things, where do you see other opportunities other than the obvious ones like MarTech and helping them get their customers back?
Well, I mean, I think, if you look at what makes companies like Amazon so effective, is, not just their advertising dollars that they have to spend, which are huge, but
Mhm.
also the fact that they're able to gain access to products and services at price points that others are simply not because of their scale, and
Mhm.
you put Walmart into the same or Costco into the same bucket. And so, you have to ask yourself, well, so maybe you supply paper cups to coffee houses. There's Dane Atkinson is running a company called Deco, where they actually are helping coffee shops gain access to products and services at the same price points that someone like Starbucks pays for them, right?
Mm.
Because they're
Mhm.
bringing all of these guys together and they're purchasing in bulk. And so you have to look for opportunities like that, which is like, where are the inefficiencies and where are small businesses getting squeezed
Mhm.
that if they had scale, they wouldn't be getting squeezed. And how can we, and what's one of the things at Alignable that we're trying to do is we're creating groups by every industry there is,
Mhm.
so that these folks can talk to each other and share the pricing that they're getting
Mhm.
and, work so that they're getting the best price out there and that they know what the best price is and they have strength in negotiations. Because in reality, we need to level the playing field so that they can be providing products and services at similar prices to what these other major providers are doing. And that's going to be one of the ways that they're going to help drive consumers back. And the other is going to be just consumers wanting their communities to be strong. I mean, we all want to live in a town where the downtown is a vibrant community, not a bunch of
Mhm.
boarded up shops.
Mhm. That's a great answer, and I think one that everybody can take away and chew on. I mean, it does. I mean, I think current conditions, maybe this is no different than any other time, but requires a great deal of creativity on our
Yep.
part as brands, um, and requires of us that we really ask questions of our customers on what they need
Mhm.
and want. So, what do you think the next 6 months of questions that will come out in the Alignable survey look like? Will they be very much the same? Will they be different? How are you thinking about the future state of the immediate future state of the survey?
Well, we're really great at trying to understand sentiment, right? We can kind of,
Mhm.
how are you feeling? What are you doing in anticipation of things?
Mhm.
There are other folks out there that have much better tracking of the actual cash movement around.
Mhm.
But, you know, what has to happen, assuming this change in consumer demand starts to occur, the first thing that you'll see is a shift in customers coming back. The other thing that we noticed is that revenue is sort of lagging on customers coming back, which means
Mhm.
customers aren't spending as much as they
Mhm.
used to. So we need to kind of get consumers not only coming back to the local businesses, but spending what they used to be spending. And then as that starts to happen and we start to see a recovery, what you'll see is pressure on inventory systems.
Mhm.
So, being able to access the supply chain. The most recent survey that we did showed somewhere over, I think it was 42, 44% of all businesses were really struggling to get access to the products that they wanted to sell in order to generate
Mm.
revenue. So you're going to have strain on that piece of the equation. And we're going to have to be looking at, what's going on with the supply chain. How can we create efficiencies there? Where is the product going? Is there a way to redivert that product back to small businesses?
Mhm.
And then ultimately, once you have the revenue and the customers and the inventory coming back, then what you'll start to see is the employee numbers starting to rise. And businesses will be able to bring people back on payroll. And we'll know we've really started to recover when we see the payrolls of these small businesses continue to start building up over time. And then we'll be well on our way. But I guess the silver lining on all of this is our infrastructure is still sound, right? I mean, we're having to rebuild the whole road structure, the electrical structure, the water structure. It's all still there in place. We just need to kind of get through this COVID crisis and then shift our behavior, and we can actually recharge our economy pretty quickly, I think.
That's a great observation to close on, because I think that it is easy to lose sight of the fact that the pipes didn't burst. I mean that we the water got shut off, but
Yeah,
the whole means of delivering the water did not. So,
right.
hey, as usual, this is always terrific. if people want access to the current survey, future surveys, past surveys, alignable.com is the place they should go.
Yeah, I'll actually send you a link that you can share with folks that goes right to the research center. We've actually built a place where you can go and you can see all of this data going back in time. And if they have any questions, they can certainly reach out to me directly. It's just Eric with a C at alignable.com, and I'd be happy to answer any questions they have.
That's awesome, man. I appreciate it. I know a lot of people do.
Anytime.
So thank you again for doing this. It is much appreciated. And as I always say, it's incredibly high value to the community, I think. So thanks a lot, and look forward to seeing you at future events.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. I love what you guys do, and we'll always be there supporting you. So
All
thanks.
right.
Thanks for doing what you do.
All righty. Take care.